The best fans of this channel know that my last video was half spent going over a rather large bombshell out of Intel, that they are looking to scale performance with their upcoming Z architectures in a similar method to how Zen does with chiplets, although they call them tiles. And this isn't just crossfire. No, this was an architecture specifically designed to be recognized in software as a single GPU despite using multiple chiplets. That is incredibly hard compared to doing the same thing with a CPU, but supposedly Intel's getting it working. In theory, the problem is when they use more than, well, even just one tile, their Foveros fabric is producing way too much energy for the communication between the tiles. And so while this technology is promising, it's hitting some major efficiency roadblocks. Roadblocks AMD hasn't hit yet when using their Infinity fabric in CPUs. And that's what I touched on, that this is basically a race against time between AMD getting a good GPU architecture out there that can leverage their Infinity fabric without using too much energy versus Intel getting their fabric to not use too much of it. And I also touched on updating my Cezanne info and Xbox APU info. But the video was already getting close to 20 minutes long, and I realized that if I continued with all of the updates I wanted to go through, it would become a 30-minute video that, although titled about Intel, was going to be 2/3 AMD. So this is really the second half, going over more APU information that's floating around out there and highlighting the massive implications of what's going on with AMD and their APU strategies right now. Now, what I want to start with, though, is the 4900, the 4900H, 4900U, the R9 APU that seems to be of the same architecture as Renoir that keeps popping up in rumors right now. Yes, there has been tremendous speculation about what a hypothetical Ryzen 9 APU could be a few months ago. Around Renoir's launch, and even until now, there has been scant information. That is, of course, until OEMs started leaking stuff accidentally, or maybe not accidentally, I don't know. What we know now, at the very least, is that it is just 8 cores. That's for sure, and it sounds like it will have higher boost clocks than the lower rung Renoir models. But is that all there is to this APU? I think there could be more. So let's get into it. I see there being 3 real options for what Ryzen 9 APUs are going to be around Renoir. The big Renoir option makes sense if you consider a point I hammered home in my Cezanne video, that Renoir is really quite a small die size for an APU, that AMD typically goes up to about 210 millimeters squared. Maybe that's what Van Gogh is. Perhaps AMD decided that, the overwhelming majority of customers are going to use DDR4 below 4000 megahertz. And the overwhelming majority of customers also don't need that extra I/O, even if some of the high-end models do. It's not that hard to design this if we want to really, really get the perfect product for each laptop form factor. I mean, that's what Intel's doing, basically designing specifically what Apple wants, and then specifically what some other OEMs want, and then making it work with multiple options. We're not going to add more than 8 cores, but maybe we add 50% more I/O for better connectivity in high-end laptops, and maybe instead of 8 compute units, we go up to, I don't know, I would guess up to about 15 compute units. That these highest end laptops will use 4300 megahertz DDR4 anyways, and so that's who this can go to. It may not sound like a big difference, but it is a difference. Having double the compute units and better I/O might just get you to around 200 millimeters squared, and you can make 4 of the 150 millimeter squared models for every 3 you can make of a 200 millimeter squared. And if this version perhaps is Van Gogh being tested at Apple, maybe it has a couple of connectivity features Apple specifically wants that almost no other OEMs would want. It is plausible that Big Renoir is Van Gogh, and that's why we've had rumors it's being tested at Apple for a while, that they might implement it pretty soon. But You know, we'll just have to see. I'm not saying this is Van Gogh, and I only call it Van Gogh to give it a name. It could be anything, and it might not even exist at all. This is option one, a theory. And I say just a theory because it did start to nag at me as I thought about this. I made a compelling argument, I think, for why they might have a big Renoir die with just more compute units and I/O, but it is pretty close. I think there might be something else going on here instead. So the hidden CU option is really based on stuff AMD's already done before. Before, with Picasso, the 12 nanometer plus APU, they had 11 Vega compute units, and they would disable the least efficient or most damaged compute unit to get a Vega 10 or or maybe 2 to get a Vega 9, and those would go into laptops. Then they would send the APUs with no major defects, but perhaps not efficient enough to go into a laptop, to desktop as the Ryzen 3400G. That is until they specifically started binning and adding a few other customizations to the models for the Microsoft Surface Edition 3780U. Right? At first, they just would disable one of the compute units in Vega 11, unless all of them worked but they weren't efficient enough. Then they go to desktop, and then they binned a specific hand-selected group of them to be all 11 compute units but clocked down to 15 watts for Microsoft Surface. So why couldn't they just be doing this again and have not told us? I mean, after all, we haven't seen any die shots, have we? And AMD continues to not want OEMs to talk about the Ryzen 4900. It seems weird to me that AMD would care if we know about a 4900 if the only difference was that it had higher clocked 8 cores. Is that really such a bombshell? Could AMD be hiding this just like they were kinda hiding the 3950X? When they showed off Zen 2 last year, it was just the I/O die and 1 core chiplet, making it obvious there would be 2 core chiplets over 8 cores, but not confirming it yet. And well, some people were too stupid to realize AMD was sandbagging. They eventually revealed the 3900X. But they revealed the 3900X first as well and said nothing about the 3950X, even though anyone with a brain knew eventually they were going to bring that out. They wanted Intel to think, oh, maybe they won't release 16 cores. Maybe there's still a hope. Why couldn't they just be doing that again? Why couldn't they be sandbagging how good Renoir really is? But talk is cheap. Let's see if we can back up any of this speculation with some real numbers. Now, these numbers are very rough, so don't nail me to a wall about them, but I will show as much work as I can when I feel it's worth it, and I will walk you through my thoughts. Now, 12 nanometer Picasso had 4 cores, yes, but 11 Vega compute units. With a die size just shy of 210, if we multiply that by the same space savings they gain moving Vega 64 to Radeon 7, 0.68, we would find that this 11 compute unit, but still just quad-core die shrunk, should get you down to at least 142.7 millimeters squared. Now you might say, we're already really close to 150, but this has 11 compute units. All right, but then you say, hey, a Zen 2 core chiplet is 70 millimeters squared. So how are we going to fit 4 more cores? Well, what a lot of people may overlook is that half of a Zen 2 desktop core chiplet is L3 cache. That's true. So let's just add a CCX 4 cores without the cache. That's only 14.5 millimeters squared, and that gets us to 157, which is really close to 150 for conservative math, and consider that we know it won't have PCIe 4.0, and it seems to have skimped on I/O. I think this could fit. All right, so conceivably, I think it could fit. Not going to specify how many CUs is in the final product, but I think that you could easily fit it at least 1 or 2 more than 8, and it could go up to 12 if you ask me. But the next question you'll want to ask to back this up is there even enough bandwidth for this? So let's look at that. Of course, going right back to Picasso, AMD deemed 2933 megahertz RAM as adequate as standard speeds for 11/12 nanometer Vega compute units. And designing Renoir, AMD would have known LPDDR4X is on the menu. So LPDDR4X, 4233 megahertz memory, divide that by 2933. Oh, there should be a budget actually for 45% more compute performance over what they had previously. So a straight die shrink, you could conceivably think AMD was thinking, well, let's go up to 16 compute units since we have this faster memory. But Vega R is 59% better per compute unit, and you don't want to starve it. So let's just go with that then, right? Let's take 15.95 Vega 11, 12 nanometer compute units divided by the fact that these compute units are clocked higher and will need more bandwidth per compute unit. Well, you get to 10. So in conclusion, I think it's common sense to say that they had enough room for at least 10 compute units and probably 12. And I do think this strategy makes sense of not adding compute units, but beefing them up, bringing it to somewhere between 9 and 12 compute units, right around the 12 nanometer version, but bringing in faster memory as an option, right? What you would say is, hey, anything that uses an R9 4900 is going to be a high-end laptop, guys, and that will get that 4300 megahertz memory. That should be enough. And then for all of the models, you know, that disable almost half of the compute units, or all the way down to 6 compute units, if they use cheap 2400 megahertz RAM, that's still enough. It's just 6 compute units. It's enough. And if option 2 is real, it makes even more sense why AMD's trying to hide the true specs of Renoir for as long as possible. They don't want you to see any die shots, they haven't done any full architecture deep dives, and they don't want OEMs telling people this exists. And it's because right now, rumors are pointing to the 7 compute unit version, it still has 1 disabled, being around the same performance as NVIDIA's dedicated MX350. We have statements that the MX350 is 20% better than the 250, and the 7CU model seems to beat the MX250, which will also be the MX330, by almost 20%. So yeah, maybe AMD wants to hide that, hey, Renoir isn't just competitive with the MX350, it actually destroys it by over 10% while using substantially less energy overall in a notebook. And that is option number 2, the hidden CU option. I definitely think this option for what the R9 4900 is definitely the most fun one. And I mean, I think the information's there. There's enough give and take with the die space that there's enough room for, I mean, at least 1 more compute unit. And there's also enough bandwidth for at least 2 more compute units without really any worry about the performance scaling, in my opinion. But I think the biggest problem with this theory is how there really aren't a lot of leaks lately with anything that has more than 8 compute units. So this actually does make me very, very skeptical about option number 2. And I almost couldn't find any evidence until, well, I did. But it's old. It's not anything from a month ago. We have some early Renoir leaks, though, that do show that they were at least testing 10 or 12 compute units. But, and I do have to highlight this, though, this is something I got in arguments with fanboys on Twitter about recently. Just because AMD's testing something does not mean they will decide to do it. This could have been a hypothetical big Renoir SoC. And if it was, it could be a separate one. Or it could mean there's latent compute units. Or it could mean it was just something they're testing that will never come out. I would certainly want to see more leaks recently to completely believe this theory, but there it is. It could be true. But that gets us to option number 3. And option number 3 is definitely the most boring option, but I think this one is one of the most likely ones of the 3. So let's go over it. The 4800H is actually just 7 compute units, but clocked the fastest, right, in your 35 to 45 watt TDP models. And then the 4800U is all 8 compute units, except clocked lower. Then the 4700U is 7 compute units, clocked lower. See where I'm going with this? There is a very, very likely chance that the 4900 series just has, you know, your 3 to 5% higher CPU core clocks and just 8 compute units, but instead of being 7 clocked fast, it's 8 clocked fast. That would still make the Ryzen 4900, even if they just, you know, maybe they shouldn't call it an R9, but it would have 10 to 20% more graphics performance depending on how high these parts clock and the fact that they're being supplied by a core that is probably, I mean, we've already seen that the 4800H is competing with the 2700X. So you clock it faster, maybe even faster than a 3700X when it's boosting, and you could have something that is about a 3700X and a, you know, 10-20% faster graphics card. Now you can see why I split this off to be its own video, can't you? I had a lot to say about the 4900 and a lot of additional thoughts to add on. One additional thought is this. I saw a lot of people when I had that Cezanne video come out say, oh, it doesn't make sense that they'd skip RDNA 1. They always use a last gen GPU architecture. That's not true. I mean, they typically did on 28 nanometer, but when they went to Raven Ridge, right, the Zen 1 APU architecture, it launched around when desktop Vega launched with Vega graphics integrated in it. And it makes sense why. If Vega is pretty much ready on 14 nanometer, why use Polaris 2? They used Vega. They skipped Polaris. And so if they're going to 7 nanometer plus for this Cezanne APU I've detailed, why would they use RDNA 1? RDNA 2 is ready, just like Vega was ready. So it's not unprecedented for AMD to skip graphics architecture generations when a new APU comes out. They do that. Sometimes they do have the newest models. Another thought I had doing this research is that it is actually pretty puzzling to me that I'm being told that that APU doesn't have something that's Zen 3. I guess, you know, the original source never actually did follow up with me. There were other sources saying it was closer to Zen 2, so maybe it is Zen 3. Although, I don't know. I don't really think it is. I think that Cezanne APU will have something close to RDNA 2, but then something close to Zen 2. And it makes you wonder, right? If they would skip RDNA 1 because RDNA 2 is ready on 7 nanometer EUV, why wouldn't they just skip Zen 2? I mean, Zen 3 is design complete. It has been for months. It could just be that they haven't gotten all the bugs out, right? And that they don't want to risk putting a brand new core architecture with their brand new GPU architecture and an APU at the same time. That's just asking for problems. That's probably what it is. But it also makes me wonder if Zen 3 is going to be on 6 nanometer instead. I don't know. I'm not confirming that speculation, but I do think that's fun food for thought. And I hope those final foods for thought filled your little bellies. I do have one more morsel for you, though, and that's just saying it out loud. It is unprecedented how many APU product launches AMD has coming out in the next 24 months. I mean, for God's sakes, it feels like we just got done reviewing the 3780U and Microsoft Surface, and now we're talking about Renoir. Now we know something called Van Gogh is being tested, and we know there's something called Cezanne on 7 nanometer plus. And we know all of these APUs with their custom AMD feature sets will be programmed for because there are other custom APUs in the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. People will leverage the strengths of AMD's architectures. And you know, all of these leaks for all of these APUs, to me, I mean, it could just mean AMD needs to get better at controlling information. But I think it suggests that a lot of these things are coming out before Tiger Lake even hits the market. That Tiger Lake is end of year, whereas we might have 7 nanometer plus APUs dropping at back to school season. Unprecedented, completely unprecedented. And while the volume of launches surprises me a bit, the performance doesn't. I have been hyping the performance of AMD's soon-to-come APU since the beginning of my channel in early 2019, where I said the next-gen consoles will target a 2080 Ti, they will most likely have SSDs, and they will have 16-thread processors. And I could not have been more right, whereas everyone else was so wrong. We're getting something at least 20% stronger than a 2080 with more IPC than the current AMD cards out there. This is 2080 Ti performance combined with 16 threads above 3.2 gigahertz with at least 16 gigs of RAM and an ultra-fast SSD. And this is not going to cost $1,000. It's probably not going to cost more than $600. I was dead on about that. And this is the new baseline for gaming soon. And this is important. This is very important. If you go over and look at some of the best looking games now, even though we have had way better components since 2013, the minimum requirements are still a lower clocked quad core i5 and a 7870. And that is because that was basically what was in a PS4. That set the bar. The bar is about to be raised. And, you know, do you guys remember those dual-core Celerons that a bunch of tech tubers and websites were recommending for budget gaming bills in 2012, despite only having 2 cores? Oh, it can run Bad Company too. And then a year after a bunch of budget builders bought them, they couldn't even boot half their games. I talked to a game engine dev recently, and he's someone who worked on the PS1 through PS3 and a lot of PC games at the same time. And there's really no doubt that there's not going to be an excuse for these quad cores anymore, even if they have 8 threads. The new bar is 16 threads, and if you don't have 16 threads, 8 isn't going to cut it. Now, 12 might if you clock it much faster than what's in the consoles. If you're a game developer, you're going to point to the $80 R5 1600 AF and go, that's an $80 12-thread CPU. You don't have an excuse for not being able to run this game when that's that cheap. Go get a $40 motherboard and you'll be able to play Battlefield 6. And speaking of Battlefield 6, it's planned to come out and probably be a modern iteration in 2022. 2022? So that's over 2 years from now. I'm sure they're working on it right now and building the engine to run with a 2080 Ti, Gen 4 SSD, and 16 threads as the baseline. Guys, photorealism is on the table in just a couple years. And take solace in this. If you're someone with an 8-thread i7, I'm not saying you gotta upgrade right now, next month, or in the next 6 months. But I am saying in 2021, you're gonna start seeing some issues if you don't have at least ultra-fast 12 threads or 16 threads. Especially if you want to run the game at 60 frames per second. If you don't care about that, I don't know. But you're going to need that, and you're going to need a faster NVMe SSD, at least at the limits of Gen 3. Outside of that, you should be able to run the games, and the games should look more amazing than you've ever seen before. And here's the thing as well. If you do upgrade early next year, everything we've been talking about will be cheaper. And 7nm plus APUs should be launching. And while a laptop with that Cezanne APU will probably be clocked lower to where it will only have about 3 teraflops, a fourth of what the PlayStation and Xbox will be working with, it would still be enough though. If the consoles are planning to do 4K 60, I see no reason why a fourth the teraflops can't run the game on a smaller screen in 1080p just fine, assuming that laptop has an NVMe drive and 16 threads. And why shouldn't it? So that's what I'm saying too, is that next-gen gaming, although it will be at a lower resolution, will be on the cards for slim laptops. These are very, very exciting times, and I personally can't wait for any of this stuff to come out. And this onslaught of APUs will be covered by me on this channel. So please do subscribe. If you liked it, ring the bell button so you don't miss anything. Listen to Broken Silicon. Look for the other content I have coming out. And if you like any of my content, consider supporting me on Patreon. Patreon supporters get a lot of exclusive content, access to a Discord where they can ask me questions, including submitting reader mail that will be read on air on podcasts. And in fact, an exclusive podcast comes out today in the new Die Shrink where I discuss with my brother various PC form factors for portable gaming. Hope you enjoy all of that, and I hope you enjoyed this, and have a great weekend. Peace.